And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like with respect to the whole thing that seems to be in fashion right now with Democrats, like one of the criticisms that I've seen that I've heard about it, which I think kind of rings true, is there is a lot of do as I say, not as I do type of attitude. Like, for example, like, Bernie Sanders right now is apparently his campaign staffers are quitting because he's not paying them $15 an hour, which he's trying to push for everywhere else in the country.
Right.
And so
Pretty
it's like
hilarious.
these like little hypocrisies. Sometimes little, sometimes not so little. That seem to be um, just right there, in plain view sometimes, and that there's something condescending about it and something disingenuous, and I
That's
think,
a funny one.
yeah,
I want to defend Bernie a little bit on this one, though.
yeah,
Um, I've seen this, a little uproar about this as well, but I would think that it's reasonable to have an exception for political campaigns, because this is not something that you would intend to earn a livelihood in the long run from being a staffer on a campaign. These are ephemeral and temporary campaigns, and they're largely driven by volunteerism.
hmm,
So, like, I would think, like, if you get involved in something like this, it's because you want to make a difference in the world. It's something you do for a short period, and yeah, it's funded by donations for the most part. So I don't really know why people would expect all of the same labor standards to apply to a political campaign. Like, you're going to be working crazy hours because you're trying to change the world.
hmm,
Um, yeah, and I would imagine. So I think it's perfectly reasonable for there to be a different standard applied, because you're almost somewhere between a volunteer and a careerist at that point. So why shouldn't there be a bit of a range in there between $0 an hour and 15?
hmm,
Where, hey, at least you could pay a little bit of your bills and stuff, rather than being a volunteer. But and I also don't know, as for the hypocrisy charge of it. I don't know if it's hypocrisy, because is that $15 minimum wage, does that apply without exception? Or would there be intended exceptions, like if you're a tiny business and you need to hire an admin person, um, or if you're paying the paper boy, if you have like a 10-year-old boy delivering papers, is that not an exception to the $15 rule?
hmm,
I imagine that there's exceptions, you know?
right. Well, I mean, that I guess the devil is in the details, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think a lot of the resistance to the blanket implementation of such minimum wage law is exactly that. Is that situations differ and people shouldn't have to be forced into it um, legislatively, but then the proponents of it think that it's just gonna create loopholes for folks who don't want to play ball, and
Mm.
there's merits to both of those positions, and you just gotta
Mm-hmm.
try and disentangle it as best you can, man.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm pretty warm towards the minimum wage idea. Um, I understand that I may not know all the economics of it, and I'm open to that. But just the notion that, okay, this is an economy that's become more and more driven by low paying, low security retail jobs. The modern service economy is
Hmm.
more precarious than ever. Um, and with like, typically costs are rising and wages have been stagnant or gone down since the 70s. I think it's reasonable to have some kind of minimum wage thing to try to interrupt the whole Walmart domination of production and consumption. And I can imagine there being exceptions for like small businesses, but those would be the ones I think where you really do want a minimum wage, are the huge companies that are operating at giant scales, and where like the entire millennial and younger generation is kind of stuck in their low wage scenarios.
Well, what's ironic about the whole thing, and this is also part of this argument too, is that if you do lift the minimum wage to a certain level, then you're also pushing people harder into competition with robots and different types of algorithmic AI and so forth. Because if it becomes, because like big companies like Walmart, they're going to be working on the basis of just running the books and seeing what's more profitable. And if at a certain point they realize that, okay, like if we just automate a bunch of these humans, it's going to be cheaper for us, those people are unemployed now. So it is an interesting thing, because it's like one of those examples of, like, I think that Jordan Peterson talks about, like sometimes your well-intentioned proposals can have can make things worse. It's like, because like the idea is like, oh, like we want everybody to be better off, but like if you actually play out the simulation of it, it might end up happening that, okay, maybe 20% of the people got better off, and then 80% are now unemployed. Like that would be obviously, I mean, hopefully it's not going to be that drastic, but like that would be a pretty nasty fallout from an otherwise positively intentioned proposal, and that's the tricky bit of it too, is that like the economy, the scale of it, and the different types of players that participate within it is rather complex and convoluted, and
indeed,
and trying to, I mean, I think honestly it would be really cool if we just had like a big ass computer that you could just run the damn simulation in and see what's gonna happen, right? Because like right now, like a lot of what we're doing just with politics and whatnot, like some of it, I think some of the things people have learned over the years, like, oh, this was a bad idea, this wasn't, and hopefully they get better at stuff, but also like it would be really nice to actually have a way to validate these assumptions.
Yeah. Well, I have one.
All right.
And it's underused in American politics. This is something that really kind of drives me crazy, is in these debates, there's very little learning from the experience of other countries.
Right.
It's spoken as if these are all theoretical things. Well, imagine if we raise the minimum wage, this might happen, that might happen. There's doomsday scenarios, etc. Well, lots of countries have a minimum wage. Why not just start by looking at their experience? Canada has minimum wage, and our unemployment levels are really low right now.
Doesn't America also have one? It's just like, it's not about minimum wage, it's about the level of it, right?
Right. Yeah, so that was, what is it? Do you know what it's at right now?
I think it's around, wasn't it about like $10 or $8? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm thinking 10. Right. So yeah, you could launch the same points against the current minimum wage and say, well, it puts people in competition with robots, and that may be true. But it is a matter of scale. So basically, what I'm saying is there shouldn't be an overreaction. There shouldn't be an emotional gut reaction to the idea of raising the minimum wage, because the devil is in the details. And the same argument could have been applied to the $10 minimum wage, but it turns out that has not been catastrophic. There are other countries with higher minimum wages, and they are not catastrophes either economically. I think Canada is a good example right now, because the minimum wage was raised to something like 15 a few years ago, and the economy is currently doing great. So it could be undermined by robots in the future, but at the moment it has a base level of people somewhat managing to pay their bills and get by. And there's still plenty of like first world companies operating in Canada. It's not like they've all fled because the labor is too high. They still want to do business here.
Right. Well,
in that sense, a big problem.
In that sense, I guess, yeah, like I think certainly as part of running a simulation, like I think it's important to incorporate historical and and data points from other places as well, and sort of use that as a barometer of sorts, and go from there. So definitely, dog.
I'd like to see more of that in the debates, like when they're doing these televised debates. Bernie started doing this in 2016. He would point to the Canadian healthcare system, or he would talk about Swedish economic policies, and you could disagree on that, but that should be talked about in these debates. Like, where are you gonna learn these things otherwise? Otherwise, they're just theoretical.
True that.
So hopefully there's more of that in the upcoming debate.